Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Red Maryland Radio, the Red Maryland Network's flagship show. Here are your hosts, Brian Griffiths and Greg Klein.
Look in my eyes, what do you see? The cost of personality. I know your anger, I know your dreams. I've been everything you wanna be. Oh, I'm the cost of personality. Like Mussolini and Kennedy, I'm the coast of personality, the coast of personality, the coast of...
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another brand new episode of Red Maryland Radio on the Red Maryland Network, coming to you from the Red Maryland Command Bunker on the bucolic western shore of Maryland along the banks of the semi-historic Magothy River. You are listening to Maryland's leading conservative talk show, Red Maryland Radio, where we... I'm your host, Brian Griffiths. Greg Klein is on assignment tonight. He has all sorts of important lawyer stuff to do. Whatever you do, do not judge Greg Klein based on his inability to be here this evening. Greg is a very busy person, and I would hope that you would join me in making sure to not judge Greg Klein. We got a lot to talk about here tonight. Thanks for sticking with us. If you haven't, if you were labored through our technical issues a little earlier, but we thank you very much for joining us here tonight. We got a lot to talk about. Ben Janus, of course, is careening his way towards the cliff, which we are very, very happy to see. But we're going to talk about where we go from this primary election and a very interesting interview that Ben Janus had with some real nut jobs over up in Baltimore City. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the other primary races too, and kind of where we go from here as it relates to, after this primary election. So that's kind of important stuff too. And also we'll talk a little bit about the Maryland State Education Association and kind of where they go after the Janus decision. So first, let's talk about where we are going to go after the primary election. Greg and I on the special Monday episode this week. If you didn't catch that out, be sure to check out Red Maryland Radio episode number 367, which is available both on our feeds, our podcast feeds, as well as on Facebook Live at facebook.com/Red Maryland. Shout out to those of you who are watching us live on Facebook right now. And we talked about kind of how we got here, but now we need to talk about where we're going. I think the most interesting piece of information that we have seen so far about where we're going is the number of Democrats who have already just abandoned ship and have already endorsed Larry Hogan for governor. And we're not talking about an insignificant number of Democrats at this point. We're talking about over 24 Democrats have already endorsed Governor Hogan. And it's not even... it's not even 2 weeks after the primary, and 24 Democrats have already endorsed Governor Hogan's reelection. You see all these Democrats who are starting to realize that, maybe Ben Janus isn't the candidate that they thought, that they thought he was going to be. Maybe Ben Janus isn't the candidate that is best suited to take on Larry Hogan in the general election. Now, of course, anybody who was listening to us kind of knew that. I mean, everybody knew that Ben Janus was, radical. He was out of touch. He was, he's somebody who does not believe in the values that we believe in as Marylanders. He is somebody who is anti-business, anti-consumer, anti-worker. I mean, he fits all of the check boxes of somebody who you would not want anywhere near the levers of power in the state of Maryland. One of the things that he did this week, and by the way, if you're not reading redmaryland.com, by the way, you're missing most of the show. But I do want to point out there was a piece that I wrote yesterday, posted called "For Democrats, Winter is Coming," and it talks about one of the things that the Democrats have done over the course of the last several years. The fact they've been maintaining an uneasy coalition between moderates and radical progressives that have been, in the General Assembly in Annapolis. It's a product of gerrymandering as much as anything else, because these Democrats in some of these districts run as far left as humanly possible, and they can get away with that because they're not candidates who are going to be electable, or don't need to worry about electability in the general election. And so, as I said, we've seen all of these Democrats. They're abandoning Ben Jealous in droves. The most interesting one, of course, being Peter Franchot. Peter Franchot, of course, prior to the primary, pledged to support the Democratic nominee. He's already walked that back and said he is just hoping to have a good relationship with whoever wins the gubernatorial election, which is kind of code for I can't endorse Larry Hogan, but please vote for Larry Hogan. That's really what Comptroller Franchot is saying there. You can't blame these guys either, okay? Because, it's fascinating because it's starting to look like a redux, to a certain extent, of the 2014 election. And I say that insofar as you have Democrats, the Democratic campaign for governor is going out of their way to make everything but governing the state of Maryland an issue. Earlier this week, Ben Jealous, this is a story that was in the Baltimore Sun. Abortion, an issue that has been muted in Maryland politics, resurfaced Tuesday when Democrat Ben Jealous questioned Republican Governor Larry Hogan's commitment to women's reproductive rights as President Donald J. Trump prepares to nominate a Supreme Court justice who could threaten Roe v. Wade. The Democratic gubernatorial nominee challenging Hogan in the November election issued a statement criticizing the Republicans' record on abortion after the governor declined to take a position on the looming Supreme Court struggle during an interview with Washington's WTOP radio. Hogan said he wants to wait and see whom Trump nominates before commenting on the president's choice. We don't need to wait and see, as Larry Hogan suggests. We need him to reassure Marylanders that despite his own troubling past on women's reproductive health, he will have the courage to protect Maryland's values, Jealous said in the statement. By the way, the fact that Jealous thinks that it's a Maryland value to murder unborn children says more about Ben Jealous than it says about Larry Hogan, but let's just leave that aside for the moment. The fact is that if Jealous wants to run a campaign based on Supreme Court nominations and President Trump, there was an open seat. He could have challenged Ben Cardin in the primary for the U.S. Senate this year. Once again, much like the last election, we're seeing a Democratic nominee who doesn't seem to understand the position that he is seeking. Ben Jealous wants to talk about the Supreme Court. He wants to talk about national issues. And this is a thing that we've seen throughout the gubernatorial campaign. And it goes back to the number that Greg and I have talked extensively about in the past. And that's that number that 41% or 42% or somewhere in the 40s think that the biggest issue in the Democratic primary, they thought the biggest issue of the Democratic primary, was somebody who would stand up to President Trump, which, by the way, kind of jives with the percentage. Ben Jealous getting about 40% of the vote in the Democratic primary. Ben Jealous isn't somebody who understands how Maryland government works. He doesn't understand his constitutional responsibilities. And from the comments that he's already made, in the wake of this primary, he doesn't seem to care. That's, I think, the most damning thing about all of this, the fact that Jealous is more interested in playing this long game. He's more interested in looking at what is in his best interest politically, and he's more interested in what's going on in Washington than he is about what's going on in Annapolis. The fact that this was the first salvo that Jealous fired at the Hogan campaign just goes to show you what the next 4 months are going to be about. The next 4 months are not going to be about Governor Hogan's record of accomplishment. It's certainly not going to be about education. It's certainly not going to be about what's actually going on in Annapolis. The next 4 months are going to be about Ben Jealous talking about Washington. And if Ben Jealous wants to talk about Washington, and he wants to talk about issues that are not related to running for the office of governor, then he probably shouldn't be all that surprised when the results this November are the same. Because if you remember, if you go back in the Wayback Machine, you remember that this is what the Democrats ran on 4 years ago. The Democrats Anthony Brown ran all of these campaigns about abortion and about all these national issues 4 years ago. And it didn't really do much for them, did it? It didn't show the focus on state issues. It didn't show the focus back then about Martin O'Malley's failure as governor. It certainly does not lend itself to providing an alternative vision for Maryland, a Maryland under Ben Jealous, than the one that we've seen under Larry Hogan. But let's face it, I don't think Ben Jealous really wants general electorate voters, wants moderate Democrats, conservative Democrats to know a hell of a lot about his vision for Maryland. He wants to make the point that he's different from Larry Hogan, but all the point he's making is that he doesn't understand the job that he wants voters to give him. You know, the Democrats are living out a nightmare scenario right now. And we get to this interview, you'll see it. This is their nightmare scenario. They've been preparing for 3 years to trying to deny Larry Hogan his agenda, trying to put him in a position to be on the defensive, to put themselves in a position where they had a legitimate challenger who could face him this fall, but instead they nominated the most radically left-wing candidate in the history of our state, somebody who couldn't even get financial or institutional support from mainstream Democrats in the primary election, somebody who had to get 85% of his primary election funding from out of state, somebody who was relying on dark money, super PACs, to try to prop up his campaign. Not only did they nominate the weakest candidate in Democratic Party history, they nominated somebody who seated conservative Democrats to Governor Hogan without a fight, and somebody who seeds pretty much the entirety of the middle, too. Moderate voters, mainstream voters, are not going to put up with Ben Jealous's radical left-wing nonsense. Democrats have managed to give voters a choice between an out-of-touch, anti-worker socialism that's dependent on money and support from Hollywood, and they've managed to run that against common-sense pragmatism that's supported by the people who actually live and work here in the state of Maryland. Now, the Democrats who have been jumping up and down for years about Larry Hogan, this is not what they wanted, man. This is not what they wanted at all. So let's go to this interview now. This is an interview that Ben Jealous did with the Real News Network, which it's kind of funny that we got two different videos this week that we're dealing with. One by Dundalk TV. If you missed our takedown of that, please go back and listen to Monday's show. But this video, this is ostensibly news, okay? But if you know the type that we're talking about, the city paper type, the Baltimore Beat type, people who want to pretend they're journalists but really should just be wearing ball caps with a hammer and sickle on them, that's the type of people that we're talking about here, okay? They're a non-profit, you can't see air quotes on the radio, that are funded by all sorts of shady left-wing groups. We're looking more into that, so stay tuned for more information on that. So Ben Jealous had an interview on the Real News Network. It was advertised as Ben Jealous takes viewer questions and discusses what his primary win means for the future of the Democratic Party, in question marks. And it was a good thing that was in a question mark, too, because Ben Jealous ultimately dropped back and punted. He didn't want anything to do with any viewer questions. That was the last thing that Ben Jealous actually wanted, was to have to answer questions from the voters of Maryland who don't want to put up with his socialist nonsense. But here is the interview, annotated as only we can do here at Red Maryland.
So we're joined by Ben Jealous. You just won the Democratic nomination for governor last week. Yep. Congratulations on the win. And right after your victory, the Republicans have come out swinging.
They're scared.
Some might...
No, we're not scared. That's the best part of this, is the fact that nobody is scared of Ben Jealous. Period.
Question using the words radical activist to describe the former head of the NAACP, but
And by the way, if you didn't catch it, the host there with the nice race baiting thing there, so in case you didn't pick up on that.
They're usually radical activists would question that. Like, what?
So they're arguing that things are going well under.
As far as they're concerned,
Larry Hogan.
the NAACP is the establishment. We've said from the beginning, I'm not running to the left, I'm not running towards the right. I'm running to the people of the state.
The people of the state overwhelmingly, by the way, support Larry Hogan. They certainly don't support the nonsense agenda that Ben Jealous is selling.
I started off this campaign just listening to working families across the state, including folks who voted for Trump. And what you heard, and voted for Hogan, and what you heard again and again was that about 85% of the big kitchen table issues facing any family are the same as every other working family. Kids are coming out of college deep in debt. Healthcare costs keep skyrocketing. Under Larry Hogan, they're up more than 10% every year.
Of course, that number is problematic because, it's funny because Ben Jealous wants to run on healthcare issues, and we've talked extensively in the past about his Medicare for All scheme. And that Medicare for All scheme, that is quite quite the scheme. But the question becomes, healthcare costs have been increasing for nearly a decade due to inaction in Washington. Ben Jealous is now coming out talking about how healthcare is a problem, that healthcare is an issue facing the state of Maryland. He's blaming Larry Hogan for it. He came out and thanked the governor on a debate stage for his efforts to protect healthcare in Maryland. So you've already got Ben Jealous being duplicitous, talking out of both sides of his mouth when it comes to healthcare. Shouldn't surprise you all that terribly much, but he's blaming Larry Hogan for issues that have nothing to do. Healthcare issues have nothing to do with anything going on at the state level. And when he's already thanked Governor Hogan for taking action on it.
Schools have fallen from first to sixth, but there's also just a sense of underlying fragility that they're just not as well funded.
Once again, public schools are fully funded in the state of Maryland. It's amazing that the Democrats continue to go back on this thing. And here's the funny thing about this too, is the fact that Jealous has an education plan. And in that plan, it would cut millions of dollars from school systems, including those in rural Maryland. So while Governor Hogan has fully funded K-12 education during all 4 years, all 4 budgets that he's introduced, Ben Jealous wants to cut funding from school systems. It's kind of ridiculous, don't you think?
A lot of frustration that the casino revenues weren't used, for instance, to significantly increase funding for the schools.
Governor Hogan, this year, has been championing the use of the casino money for public schools. It's an issue that Governor Hogan got passed. It's amazing if Ben Jealous actually stopped paying attention to Washington and started paying attention to what's going on in Annapolis, maybe he wouldn't be so pissed and be running for governor of Maryland. Because maybe he'd realize how good of a job Larry Hogan is actually doing.
The opiate crisis. Here in Baltimore City, killing more people than bullets by a long shot, and across the state. Terrifying. And so what I've done from the beginning of this campaign is just simply have the courage to level with the people and say this is what it takes. I'm a lifelong community organizer. I'm a civil rights leader. I teach public policy. And I was trained by my grandma, who also helped train Barbara Mikulski. My grandma was a 101-year-old retired Maryland social worker. And she would always just say, look, baby, you can't half solve a problem because you still got a problem. So I'm committed to giving the people of Maryland whole solutions to the real problems that face their families, and things we can do in real time to improve lives.
Now, it's going to be an uphill battle against Governor Hogan. He's the incumbent in the state. He said he's created 100,000 jobs. He says he's gotten the government off the backs and out of the pockets of people, of residents across Maryland. Things are going well. It's his argument. He even recently changed his Facebook page and his campaign Facebook profile to say Democrats for Hogan.
Yeah.
That's his argument, right?
He's scared.
Going for the Democratic vote.
The funny part is the level of projection that Ben Jealous is here. Oh, he's scared. He's scared. Yeah, okay, sure.
votes.
He's scared. I mean, what he knows is this. The only way he got in office is we had the lowest Democratic turnout since 1942.
A number that has been debunked multiple times by people, not just Republicans, but by Democrats. You can go back to redmaryland.com, and there is a link there where we talked about a Mark Mellman study that shows that Democratic turnout was what it was in 2014, the same as it was in 2010, 2006. Larry Hogan still would have won. It's amazing that 4 years after this election, 4 years after this after the 2014 election, the Democrats are still deluding themselves and blaming turnout.
And if we simply turn out Democrats at the level we did at 2010, there's virtually no way for him to win. What he also knows is that's what I specialize in. As the youngest president in the history of the NAACP, I was called the unsung hero of Obama's re-election by Van Jones on CNN. So we turn out 1.2 million unlikely voters. So we turn out those 2010 voters, we win. We turn out unlikely voters, we wallop them. And I've shown the ability to compete in every corner of the state. I won in 22 out of 24 counties.
In a
I was
Democratic
leading in the parts
primary.
of the state for months. And so he knows that my brand of kind of kitchen table politics, focusing on fully funding education, getting healthcare costs truly under control by taking on every pharmaceutical company, by moving to state-based Medicare for all,
Raising costs.
ending mass incarceration.
And by the way, as we've talked about before, what Ben Jealous wants is to bring, socialist health care to Maryland. Ration care, expensive care, the kind of care that gets kids killed like we saw in the Charlie Gard situation, the Alfie Evans situation. The kind of health care solutions that take control away from your family and put it into the hands of faceless bureaucrats under Ben Jealous's charge. He doesn't want to fix health care. He wants to socialize health care and consolidate the power of government in Annapolis. That's what he wants to do. He doesn't care about health care. He just wants to consolidate power in government for the sake of consolidating power in government.
And using the money to bring down the cost of public higher education. He knows that there's a lot of people who want that. They're not just Democrats. They're independents. And they're even some of the folks who voted for him. And so I'll bring the fight to him, and we'll win.
A lot's been made across the country with wins like yours. We saw what happened.
And by the way, I forgot to mention, as written about at redmaryland.com, single-payer health care, it's failed in every state that it's been attempted in. Colorado, Vermont, California, where it would have doubled the state budget. Ben Jealous has no way to pay for it, won't talk about how he's going to pay for it, knows that he'd have to raise taxes, particularly on working people, in order to pay for it, but he thinks people are just running scared.
In New York and in other states of progressive challengers taking on the establishment within the Democratic Party. So far, the majority of the Democratic Party of the state that didn't back you in the primary has come around, and they've
Everybody's on board.
backed you.
Fun fact, at the Democratic Unity Rally of the 7 other Democrats who were running for governor, only one showed up. Only one showed up.
Everybody's on board. I mean, Francho, quite frankly, our concern was going to run in support of Hogan. And so the fact that he's staying neutral, I see as an improvement based on what our concern was.
That's called trying to shovel the you-know-what back into the horse.
Everybody else is in support. Senator Cardin, Senator Van Hollen, all the Congress people who are Democrats, all but one. The major county execs, past Governor O'Malley, all of them.
Not a single person, by the way, has done a single thing for Ben Jealous since his nomination. And even the Democrats in a fundraising letter last week minimized Ben Jealous, didn't even talk about Ben Jealous.
Worked with all these folks and worked well with them. I led the effort to abolish the death penalty, but also co-chaired the effort to pass the DREAM Act, help pass marriage equality, and a number of kind of smaller civil rights victories and some county-level victories.
Many of which, by the way, the people who actually did the work are kind of pissed he's taking credit for it, but we can talk about that
Getting money
later.
out of politics. I brought John Sarbanes and I together, for example. And so we have a long series of relationships, and I feel good. And quite frankly, they also saw me win by a 10% margin, 22 out of 24 counties, so they know that my campaign has the energy, to increase the vote, and that benefits all of us.
And your plans for places like Baltimore City, where we've seen endemic poverty for generations, that have been controlled by Democrats for generations, those plans to revitalize those areas have not gotten much attention in the press. Talk about what your vision is and how it's going to be different than what's been happening for the last several decades, which doesn't seem like it's improving conditions very much.
It's not, and Larry Hogan's been a real disappointment in that respect. I mean, under him, schools are down, healthcare costs are up, violence is up in Baltimore City, for example. Opiate deaths are up. The economy's stuck. People's incomes literally have risen by thousands in surrounding states in the last few years, but in Maryland, just by hundreds.
It's amazing. It's amazing the fake, interesting facts that Ben Janus will just throw out there when he says these sort of things. It's actually humorous and sad all at the same time. But what are you gonna do?
One of the things that's different about me that doesn't usually make the soundbite is I'm a tech investor. That's what I've done for the last 5 years. I invest in social impact tech companies, double bottom line. An example, Pigeonly, co-founded by a graduate of Morgan State. It's cut the cost of your loved one calling home from prison by 80%. It serves about 30% of federal inmates, now expanding into state facilities. And 68% of our companies have a black, Latino, or female founder. In fact, the fastest growing one, a woman named Ana Roca Castro, she's all above. She's Afro-Dominicana. And so what I know is that Maryland can build a much more robust economy. It means we're going to have a plan. Terry McAuliffe, I think somewhat surprisingly, attracted a bunch of cybersecurity headquarters to Virginia that people expected to be in Maryland because we have NSA and Cyber Command. And then I said, how'd you do that? He said, well, plan beats no plan. Your guy doesn't have a plan. We have Larry Hogan said that he would keep every Fortune 500 company here. And they thought, I don't know, magically, because maybe he's a Republican, he would do that. Well, he's already lost one. And what I know is that the bedrock of our economy are small businesses, including our startups, and we can keep a lot more of them here. We can grow more than we are, and we can become a leader, make Baltimore the capital of the green technology economy.
So let's talk about that for a second. Ben Janus is now talking at this point about how small business is the economic engine of our state and how important businesses are. Yet his plans would require doubling the state budget, raising taxes on everybody, and he thinks that that's going to look like a business climate that businesses want to invest in. Now, sure, Baltimore can be the capital of a green, of a green revolution, green business, but that would go back to the old Martin O'Malley rent-seeking behavior of the past, where Ben Janus would just pick his donors and his cronies in order to make sure that they made money off of the green investment energy. If you're getting a sense here that Ben Janus is basically Martin O'Malley on overdrive, that's what you're getting. You're getting somebody who wants to raise your taxes, somebody who wants to grow government, somebody who wants to make his friends rich, and somebody who doesn't give a damn about working people.
We can make Maryland once again number 3 in health sciences, while even building on some strengths like cybersecurity, and in the process expand our economy in ways that Hogan has failed to do. You look at medical cannabis, $200 million industry. Blacks and Latinos completely locked out of the 24 licenses.
By the way, that was something that was passed by Democrats, that was structured by Democrats. And Ben Janus has the audacity, the gall to blame it on Larry Hogan. You just get the feeling that there's really no lie Ben Janus won't tell in order to try to win this election.
When I'm governor, I will lead us in making cannabis legal for adult use, period. We'll regulate it, we'll tax it, but we'll also make sure that the entrepreneurs reflect the state.
Would you support something like what they're doing in Oakland, where former victims of mass incarceration are sort of first in line to get those licenses?
Absolutely. We have to make sure that the communities that are most ravaged by the
people who break the law, we're calling it mass incarceration.
From shifting to saner policies and, frankly, pulling money out of the pockets of the cartels and the gangs and putting it in the pockets of farmers and business people. Absolutely. I think it's important to not just focus on ownership, but as you signaled, to also focus on the jobs. One of the ways you can do that is it's called micro zip code targeting. Your zip code, you typically think it was 5 digits, but it's actually 9 digits. And those last 4 digits after the dash can take you right down to like one part of a block. And so you can say, look, in these 9-digit zip codes, this is where the open-air drug markets have been. This is where the epicenter of the war on drugs has been. And we've got to hire people from those areas, too.
So many are expecting these midterm elections to be a referendum on Trump's presidency. We know that with the Supreme Court possibly changing, with Trump trying to appoint a new...
Yeah, make no mistake, by the way, Ben Jealous is the only one who doesn't realize this race is for governor of Maryland, that he's not running for president or running for the U.S. Senate.
Justice to replace Kennedy in the next few months before the election. A lot of people are going to come out and vote. Hogan has gone out of his way to distance himself from President Trump, even though he's a Republican. Do you think it's right to sort of tie those two figures together?
Hogan's tied himself to Trump's coattails via his lieutenants. Betsy DeVos, please come into our state. And then he mimics her by shifting tens of millions of dollars from our general fund, not to the public schools that are underfunded, but to private schools in the form of vouchers. Jeff Sessions, he literally parrots him on immigration policy and on incarceration policy.
It's amazing, by the way, that Ben Jealous doesn't poke this dude, the interviewer's eye out here with all of the lies he's telling. But, you know, what are you going to do?
Calling for a return to the failed truth in sentencing policies are wildly expensive, and implementing new mandatory minimums. And then on the Chesapeake Bay, Larry Hogan, more than any other Republican, could have blocked the appointment of Scott Pruitt, but he stood silent. All he had to do is say, hey, guys, I'm governor of Maryland, one of the most popular governors in the country. This dude's from Oklahoma, and he's already promised to destroy the Chesapeake Bay restoration plan.
You know, there are a lot of reasons why Scott Pruitt, who of course resigned today, turned out to be an absolute train wreck as the EPA director. But it's a good time to point out, you got Democrats who were part of the Chesapeake Climate Network, elected officials, endorsing Larry Hogan over Ben Jealous for all of the work that Larry Hogan has done on the environment.
Instead, Larry Hogan tries to have it both ways. He takes credit for things really Obama did as far as cleaning up the Bay, while literally not only being a welcome mat for Scott Pruitt, just laying down and letting him be stepped all over, but also making it easier to pollute our Bay. The poultry industry invested $250,000 in helping to elect him his first day in office. He cut regulations to make it easier to literally dump chicken mess straight into the Bay.
Finally, we're almost out of time, but final question. We know that with the Supreme Court decision in Janus, it's going to hurt public sector unions, which backed you, in a big way in the primary. We know that working people across the state and this country are struggling. At Johns Hopkins Hospital, there's workers that are trying to form a union with the national nurses and who endorsed you. And they're saying that they're facing unfair labor practices. The hospital is denying it. What's your message to working people around the country and in the state of Maryland who are fighting for
We need
better
labor
work?
peace. Every working person has a right to organize. That needs to be respected. When it comes to public sector unions, I know what built my family's good fortune. Both my grandparents were able to become state workers here in Maryland, one a probation officer, the other social worker, and become members of AFSCME. My grandmother's a 101-year-old retired Maryland social worker. Under Larry Hogan, she's looking at her pharmaceutical prices jumping through the roof.
Again, nothing to do with Larry Hogan.
I will make sure that people's pensions are protected, that they're well treated, that we frankly make their jobs less risky. Hogan has allowed there to become extreme shortages, including for corrections officers. I've talked to corrections officers who had their skull fractured multiple times, legs broken, and it's because they're understaffed, and he's done nothing on that. So I'll have the back of working people. I'll have the back of people who want to organize. Not only
The back's the perfect place for him to stick the knife in, by the way, once he raises their
am
taxes.
I a grandson of two proud union members. I'm a former union member myself, and I know that working people deserve the right to bargain for a better wage. A quarter of our workers in this country, similar in Maryland, have to sign non-compete agreements. And I'm talking about when you're working for a fast food restaurant. So you literally cannot say, hey, they'll pay me 50 cents per hour more, why don't you pay me a quarter? They can't negotiate at all. And we've got to make sure that every worker has the right to advocate for themselves and to organize to get better wages and better treatment for their family.
All right, Ben Jealous, thank you so much for joining us. You are the Democratic nominee for governor of Maryland. We're going to be following this campaign really closely on therealnews.com, so watch all of our coverage. Check out our website, Facebook, and Twitter. Thanks so much for watching.
Now, again, the real news, radical leftists, some of the same people who work for the city paper, people who have an agenda but don't actually have the audacity, don't have the courage, the testicular fortitude, if you will, to note that they have an agenda. So look, that interview shows you what Ben Jealous is going to be about, okay? Ben Jealous is going to be about weed, he's going to be about socialist healthcare, and he's going to be about doing the union's bidding, okay? That is not a recipe for success in Maryland in 2018. There is no way humanly possible that Ben Jealous is going to get the moderate Democrats, the conservative Democrats, and the independents to go for this nonsense. There is nothing in what Ben Jealous says that screams to the people of Maryland, I can make things better. Now, to be fair, maybe there were no Democrats who could have done that. But we're talking about a Democrat who wants to turn Maryland into Cuba on the Chesapeake, who wants to turn our economy into something like Venezuela's. Is that what people really want here in Maryland? I certainly don't think so, and I'm pretty sure that most of the voters of the state of Maryland will agree with me on that. Needless to say, we got a lot to cover here in the primary elections, in the general election coming up over the course of the next several months. Let's go ahead and take a quick break. We'll talk about more of the primary elections, and we will talk about the Janus decision on the flip side of the break. Stick with us, why don't you? You're listening to Red Maryland Radio on the Red Maryland Network.
In a world where drinking and driving is a serious offense, you could spend time in jail and lose your license. You need experienced legal representation. You need the litigator. For 2 decades, Greg Klein has been representing individuals charged with drunk driving throughout Maryland, and he is coiled and ready to pounce to help you. If you or someone you know has been charged with drinking and driving, contact the litigator, Gregory M. Klein, at 410-541-6DUI. That's 410-541-6384. And check out the blog for more information, AnneArundelDUI.com.
I'm Larry O'Connor, and you're listening to Red Maryland, where Maryland comes to talk.
Are you a business or candidate that wants to reach an audience of well-educated conservative voters? Red Maryland has an advertising solution that will fit your needs. Reach thousands of Maryland's most well-informed conservative citizens at rates that are reasonable for candidates and businesses of any size. For more information, contact us at 410-205-4875 or email us at redmaryland@gmail.com. so you too can be a partner with Red Maryland. You can help out Red Maryland by making your Amazon purchases through Red Maryland. Just visit redmaryland.com, click on the Amazon banner, and make your purchase as normal. It doesn't cost you anything, and Red Maryland will get a portion of the proceeds to keep bringing you the content that you love. We want your feedback. Contact us at any time at redmaryland@gmail.com. You can also leave feedback on our Red Maryland Talkback line by calling 410-205-4875. Get social with Red Maryland. Follow us on Twitter at Red Maryland. Like us on Facebook, facebook.com/Red Maryland. Follow us on Pinterest, pinterest.com/Red Maryland. You can also like us on Google+. Show your support for conservatism and for Red Maryland by visiting our Zazzle store. Visit Zazzle.com/Red Maryland to buy the latest Red Maryland t-shirts, drinkware, and more. That's Zazzle.com/Red Maryland. You're listening to the network the mainstream media wishes you wouldn't. The Red Maryland Network.
And we're back. Red Maryland Radio on the Red Maryland Network. I am your host, Brian Griffiths. Greg Klein off this evening. Once again, please, I ask you, beg of you, do not judge Greg Klein. Let's talk about some of the other primary elections that are going on here, or the primary election results and where we go towards the general election. And there are a couple of big ones that I really want to focus on right now. First, of course, is going to be up in Baltimore County, where we still, here we are, over a week after the primary election, and we still have absolutely no idea who the Baltimore County executive nominee is going to be for the Democrats. At this very moment, 42 votes separates Johnny Olszewski from State Senator Jim Brochin. Olszewski has 27,270 votes. Jim Brochin has 27,228 votes. And just a little over 1,000 behind him is Vicky Almond, 26,211. So Olszewski has 32.9, Brochin has 32.9, Vicky Almond has 31.7. Probably one of the closest elections I can remember in recent memory. Now, tomorrow, they will count the absentee ballots and they will count the provisional ballots. And presumably, sometime tomorrow afternoon, both in this race and in the Montgomery County race that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, presumably we will have a winner. One till the lawyers get involved. Down in Montgomery County, Mark Elrich, the county councilman, has 36,117 votes. David Blair has 35,968 votes. So Elrich, at least compared to what's going on in Baltimore County, Elrich has a seemingly insurmountable 149 vote lead. Elrich got 29.1% of the vote, Blair 29% of the vote. Let's talk about Baltimore County first. I know we talked about the Baltimore County executive race a little bit when we talked about that nutso video that the Pat McDonough folks put out there, and Pat McDonough's absolute, snowflake routine that he's got going on by saying he's not going to support or endorse Al Redmer in the general election. And Pat McDonough can stick it at this point. Al Redmer is probably the luckiest guy we've got right now because Al Redmer is in a position. Baltimore County is a swing county, as you know, but we haven't seen a Baltimore County executive that's a Republican. Nobody's won those elections, in a long time. I mean, it's been 28 years since we've elected a Republican as the Baltimore County executive. But, as you know, the Republican, Baltimore County is a huge county for Governor Hogan. It's of incredible importance for Governor Hogan's reelection. And having Al Redmer on the top of the ballot is going to be crucial. And right now, Redmer basically has the playing field all to himself. For the last week and a half, Redmer can start his general election campaign, go out there, support himself, support the Hogan campaign, work as a team, while the Democrats are still trying to figure out who their nominee is even going to be. On top of it, Baltimore County is a working class county. They are people where there are a lot of working class Democrats, union Democrats in Baltimore County. Those are folks who tend to be more on the side of somebody like Governor Hogan. And they're probably going to be more on the side of Al Redmer, too, for a couple of reasons. One, because Redmer's able to go out and campaign right now while the Democrats are still trying to lawyer up and figure out how their primary is going to finish up. But two, the Democratic nominee, whoever it is going to get dragged down by Ben Jealous. Ben Jealous being a socialist. Ben Jealous talking about Medicare for all. Ben Jealous talking about tax increases on the middle class. Ben Jealous talking about weed all the time. Ben Jealous talking about, prison policies are not going to play well with law and order Democrats in Baltimore County. And whether Ben Jealous knows it or not, that is going to be a drag on Brochin or Olszewski or whoever the nominee is, and it's going to be a drag on Democrats across the ticket. This is a tremendous opportunity because now every Republican can ask their Democratic opponent. Every voter can ask the Democratic nominee Do you support that socialist Ben Jealous? And now that Ben Jealous has already come out there and talked about how he's a socialist, it's pretty fair game to ask the question whether or not the Democratic nominees support the socialist Ben Jealous. It's a fair question. It's something fair to ask. In Montgomery County, the story is a little different. In Montgomery County, we have the whole issue not only of not knowing who the Democratic nominee for county executive is going to be, but there's also the little issue of County Councilwoman Nancy Florine jumping into the county executive's race this week, or attempting, I should say, to jump into the county executive's race this week as an independent. And I wrote about this at redmaryland.com because the Montgomery County executive race got scrambled this week by a couple of different things. One, you have Florine, who is attempting to run as an independent for county executive. Now, there are some questions about the law and whether or not the law allows Florine to run for county executive as an independent. And I say that because Florine was, at least until recently, a registered Democrat. And you can't run as an independent unless you are independent. And the voter registration period to party switching period doesn't open again until Monday the 9th. I'm sure lawyers will be involved in that too, trying to figure out if Florine is actually eligible to be an independent candidate for county executive. But if you assume that she does wind up on the ballot, that you assume that she is able to run as an independent, now you've got Florine, a county councilwoman, very liberal, but somebody who is more attuned, if you will, and I will, to the business interests in Montgomery County, running against a fellow county council member, Mark Elrich, somebody who is more left-wing, more of the Ben Jealous mold, something that you'd think would play well in Montgomery County. But Montgomery County liberals are business-oriented liberals. They really want to make sure that their business interests are protected. So presumably you have a real general election race in Montgomery County this year. And that brings us to the third candidate, Robin Ficker. Ficker, of course, got term limits passed 2 years ago, a huge victory in Montgomery County. It's a victory for all Marylanders, really. And that caused a lot of the turmoil in Montgomery County this year, where you wound up with 30-odd some people running for county council seats, and you wound up with so many county council members running for county executive. And you wind up with Ficker taking advantage of the county fundraising plan, the publicly financed campaign. One of the few Republicans, by the way, to apply in Montgomery County for public financing. And Ficker got a big win this week because eventually, there was some question about whether or not Ficker was going to be deemed eligible. Ficker was threatening to sue. Lawyers this year are making a hell of a lot of money in this election. I'll tell you that much. There are so many legal challenges and things going on and things to come. As I said, particularly with potentially both of these races winding up in court about counting ballots. So you've got Ficker now, who, believe it or not, Ficker actually leads. Once he gets his check from the public financing scheme, Ficker will have more cash on hand than any candidate. Ficker has a shot at this. Not a great shot. But as I wrote in my piece at Red Maryland, Robin Ficker has got a much better shot to win the county executive election than he did a week ago. Because now Ficker's got the public financing. He's got that cash on hand. He'll be able to spend that. He'll be able to do his mailers, do his media buys. And now he's got potentially Nancy Florine splitting the Democratic vote. 4 years ago, Jim Shalek got 34.2% of the vote. 4 years before that, Doug Rosenfeld got 34.2% of the vote. These are both in the Republican nominees for county executive. If Robin Ficker gets 34.2% of the vote, and Florine and Elrich split the rest, Robin Ficker becomes county executive. That's a thing that could happen. It's a thing that is improbable, but it's a thing that could happen, especially when you talk about having Ben Jealous at the top of the ticket, especially when you talk about having the campaign finance, public financing resources available to him, especially when you consider that Florine and Elrich could basically split the vote. And when you consider the Larry Hogan campaign, and the Hogan campaign is going to make Montgomery County a priority. Montgomery County, they're not going to win Montgomery County, but if you can get 40% of the vote in Montgomery County, Governor Hogan's going to have a really good night. And 40% of the Hogan vote going to Hogan in Montgomery County, and if that vote carries over to Robin Ficker could win the election. And that, my friends, would be a tremendous upset. That would be one of the biggest shockers in state history, would be a Republican getting elected county executive in Montgomery County in 2018. Some of the other races that we're going to be looking at, of course, here that we're going to be paying close attention to, Craig Giangrande running for state senate against Ron Young after Craig Giangrande easily dispatched Billy Shreve and after Ron Young survived 2 primary challengers in District 3. Of course, we're also watching District 8, where Christian Miele, Delegate Miele, is running against Kathy Klossmeyer. We're keeping an eye on District 42, where Chris West is trying to get elected to the state senate. We're keeping an eye on District 30, where Ron George is running against Sarah Elfreth for state senate. We're also keeping an eye on District 38, where Mary Beth Carroza, Delegate Carroza, is challenging Senator Jim Mathias. Remember, all of these races, if the Republicans win 5 of those seats, that's the drive for 5. That's 19 state senators, and everything changes. Because you would have a veto-proof minority in the state senate to stop some of the nonsense that the Democrats keep pushing through. And of course, also, let's not forget John Grasso, if he can, get his stuff together, running against Pam Beidel, who's not exactly the greatest candidate in the world, is also another potential pickup opportunity for Republicans in the state senate. Other key races to watch, of course, Alan Kittleman running for re-election as Howard County executive is a big one. What happens in the U.S. Senate race, and I say that because we have Ben Cardin running against Tony Campbell, the Republican nominee, but we've also got Neil Simon out there running as an independent. Whether or not he's going to do like Rob Sabani did in screwing over Dan Bongino in 2012, where Bongino wound up with only 26% of the vote, which had 16% siphoned off by Sabani. Well, I don't know. I don't know what's all going to happen when it comes to that. So, it's just kind of a matter of, how this all plays out. What kind of resources Tony Campbell has. What kind of resources Neil Simon winds up with. It'll be interesting to see. Simon's got to go on the ballot first. But obviously, we are going to be covering the general election soup to nuts here on Red Maryland. So, of course, be sure to stick with us on Red Maryland as we cover you. The only place, really, the most important place to listen to election coverage here in the state of Maryland. Why don't we take a quick break? When we come back, we will talk about the Janus decision, the Maryland State Education Association, and what that's going to mean. And it's going to mean a lot of bad things for the teachers union, our good friends over there. Stick with us. You're listening to Red Maryland Radio on the Red Maryland Network.
Getting caught for a DUI is something that can happen to anyone. A simple mistake that can have serious lifelong consequences for the person who commits the offense. That's why if you're caught driving under the influence, you should have the best attorney standing up for you, protecting your rights. Gregory M. Klein is that attorney, a lawyer with a track record of strong defense for those arrested for DUI. If you need a lawyer, call 410-541-6DUI or visit AnnaRundleDUI.com. Gregory M. Klein, 410-541-6384.
Welcome back. You are listening to Red Maryland Radio on the Red Maryland Network. I am your host, Brian Griffiths.
Z105. And we're back!
And thank you very much for listening. Again, Greg Klein is off this evening. Please, again, do not judge Greg Klein for not being here on this evening's show. Want to talk about the Janus case real quick. If you didn't hear it last week, the court case, the Janus versus AFSCME court decision that came down from the Supreme Court. Something that has actually been an issue here in Maryland for quite a long time. Janus sued because Janus was forced to pay a fair share fee to AFSCME on behalf of his so-called representation. Janus did not want to be a member of AFSCME out in Wisconsin, where he is from, but he was forced to do so because the state law required fair share payments for people who were being, quote, represented by the union. The idea was because the member, the employee, was benefiting from the representation of the union, that the union should be entitled against the will of the employee to some of the employee's money. Well, the Supreme Court found out that that was a violation of the Constitution, something that anybody who was paying a lick of attention probably could have figured out on their own. And those type of fees are now unconstitutional. And that includes here in Maryland, where, of course, the Democrats passed a fair share fee a long time ago to force people who didn't want to be members of the union to pay money to the union. Needless to say, our good friends at the Maryland State Education Association are going to start feeling the burn of that very soon, because you see, there are a lot of teachers who are members of MSCA, which that's not necessarily something that's affected by the Janus decision. But a lot of them are members of the MSCA because the thought process is, well, if I have to pay the fee, why don't I just join the union? And some of that is true. Some of that is partially because, it's partially because when you're a teacher, you get kind of the insurance as a member of the union. You get that malpractice insurance in case there is some sort of lawsuit against you. So you get that as a member of the union. But a lot of people don't necessarily, teachers included, don't necessarily want anything to do with the damn union. Because, as we have talked about repeatedly, the Maryland State Education Association does not have the interests of teachers at heart. They don't care about the teachers. They have stated, as we've talked about at Red Maryland, as their spokeshack, Sean Johnson, has said repeatedly, the Maryland State Education Association's goal is to be the leader in left-wing politics in the state of Maryland, not somebody who is representative of the teachers who are working on their behalf, who are working on behalf of the students, who are working to make America a better place. Now all of a sudden, the MSCA no longer has that reasoning where people would just, if they have to pay anyway, they might as well join the union. So that's going to be some money that they're going to lose. They're going to lose the money based off of the people who weren't members of the union, people who were forced to pay the fair share fee. That's going to take a little bite out of their, take a bite out of their budget too. Ultimately, why Janus was important was because basically you had people being forced to fund speech that was against, that they disagreed with. So if you were a conservative and a member of the MSCA, your dues were going to fund radical left-wing causes that you didn't want to pay for because the state of Maryland was forcing you to pay for it. And that's ultimately why Janus was found unconstitutional. But that's going to hurt the MSCA in a couple of different ways. One, of course, is going to hurt them in the bottom line. And I tell you what, those MSCA union folks really hate it when you hurt their bottom line because so many of them are making fat six-figure paychecks doing union stuff. That's what they really want. That's what they really want the money for, because you got people getting rich off working for the union. But also it's going to hurt them because it's going to hurt their credibility when people start leaving the union. And that goes back to something Ben Jealous has been saying for a while now. The MSCA, as you know, gave its endorsement to Ben Jealous during the primary, an endorsement that ostensibly is going to carry over into the general election. But when we say that the MSCA endorsed Ben Jealous, it really wasn't Ben Jealous, or it wasn't the teachers who endorsed Ben Jealous or the union that endorsed Ben Jealous. It was 255 out of 300 delegates to a convention endorsed Ben Jealous. So 255 teachers decided to back Ben Jealous. The problem is, nobody asked the membership of the MSCA. Excuse me. Nobody asked the rank and file union members who they wanted to support for governor. You just had these delegates decide on their behalf. And wouldn't it be a damn interesting day if the MSCA decided to open up that vote and let the teachers vote on who the endorsement should go to? Just a thought, probably not anything that's actually going to wind up happening, but needless to say, the Janus decision is going to affect unions in the state of Maryland for quite a long time because it's going to take a bite out of their finances. People who don't want to belong to the union will no longer be forced by the state of Maryland to pay a portion of their proceeds to the union so the union can go, throw it at their leadership or throw it at Democratic candidates and throw it towards causes that are against the workers' interest. It ultimately is going to diminish union power in the state of Maryland politically. It's ultimately going to put more money in the bank accounts of the people who actually earn the money. And ultimately, hopefully, it will somewhat diminish the iron grip that unions have over the Maryland Democratic Party. And I think that is a good place, a good, happy place to wrap up this week's edition of Red Maryland Radio here on the Red Maryland Network. I want to thank you very much for joining us, particularly those of you who stuck with us after our first attempt at this. We thank you for that. It's never easy with technology, but we made it through another episode of the show. Be sure to check out all of our Red Maryland Network programming. Sunday is another brand new episode of The Air Raid with yours truly. Ostensibly, Greg does the Conservative Refuge on Tuesdays. We'll see. Thursday is another brand new episode of Red Maryland Radio here, the flagship on the Red Maryland Network. You, of course, can subscribe to Red Maryland Network program on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, the TuneIn Radio app, and Google Play. You, of course, can also catch us on Facebook Live at facebook.com/RedMaryland. We're also uploading to YouTube now, youtube.com/RedMaryland. You can find new episodes of Red Maryland Radio there as well. Of course, redmaryland.com is the home base for all things Red Maryland. Click on the elections link, and there you can see all of our coverage for this upcoming general election. For those of you who loved the primary election page, and many of you did, because Red Maryland's biggest readership month ever, June 2016, you can go ahead and click on that, and we'll have all of our candidate surveys from the primary election for the winners there, plus additional coverage that we're picking up along the way there at redmaryland.com. You just click on the elections link. I believe it's redmaryland.com/2018 elections. You can also click on the support us link and find all sorts of ways to support Red Maryland, including the subscription links, as well as our Amazon link. You can make your purchases through that Amazon link, and a portion of that purchase will come back to Red Maryland to help us grow and enhance the network. You also are a Zazzle link, zazzle.com/redmaryland. You can buy Red Maryland Network gear there. And of course, you can throw us a couple of bucks at paypal.me/redmaryland. Of course, we are on social media, as I mentioned, facebook.com/redmaryland. We're on Twitter @RedMaryland. We are on Instagram @RedMaryland. And once again, as I say, you are the force multiplier. Please share Red Maryland stuff with your colleagues, co-workers, neighbors, friends, co-religionists, whatever. Please share Red Maryland stuff with them and help us, invite them to like our page and make sure that the news is getting out there about the important stuff that we are providing here as a service at redmaryland.com. Of course, you can contact us at any time. redmaryland@gmail.com is our email address. And of course, you can call us on the Red Maryland Talkback line at 410-205-4875. That's 410-205-4875. And we will feature your comments on a future Red Maryland Network program. Folks, thank you very much for joining me in this week's episode of Red Maryland Radio. And again, be sure to tune into the Air Raid and all of our Red Maryland Network programming. And stay tuned to redmaryland.com throughout the election, your home base for all things general election here in the state of Maryland. So for Greg Klein, who's not with us tonight, I'm Brian Griffiths. You have been listening to Red Maryland Radio on the Red Maryland Network.
Oh, radio, tell me everything you know.
for using Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.